My son stood up in that courtroom, looked directly at the judge, and said his father had built everything alone. I sat 3 feet away and said nothing. Not because I had no words, because I had spent 41 years teaching that boy to be honest, and I couldn't understand how he had forgotten every lesson so completely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got there. My name is Edith Crane, and I was 63 years old when my husband of 41 years handed me a document in our kitchen and told me to sign it. Not divorce papers. Not yet. A post-nuptial agreement. He had already hired an attorney, already had it notarized waiting for my signature. He set it on the counter beside my coffee cup like it was a grocery list. I stood there looking at it for a long time. The kitchen was the same kitchen where I had cooked 30,000 meals. The same counter where I had helped our son Warren do science projects, where I had stood on Christmas Eve assembling toys after midnight, where I had cried the morning my mother passed, and my husband hadn't come home from work until after dinner. Nothing in that kitchen had changed, but the man standing on the other side of the counter suddenly felt like a complete stranger. "What is this?" I asked. My husband, Raymond Crane, straightened his tie. He had started wearing ties every day about 2 years earlier. Before that, he wore whatever was comfortable. The tie was one of those small things I had noticed without fully understanding. "It's a legal document," he said. "Standard. 41 years of marriage, and he called it standard. I didn't sign it. I told him I needed time to read it. He looked at me the way he had been looking at me for months by then, the way you look at something that has become inconvenient. He picked up his keys and left without another word. I sat down at that kitchen table and read every line. The agreement claimed that all business assets accumulated during our marriage belonged entirely to Raymond, generated through his individual professional effort. It claimed my role had been domestic in nature, and that I waived any future claim to business holdings, real estate tied to the company, or investment accounts associated with his professional work. I put the document down. Then I picked it up again. Then I set it face down on the table because I couldn't stand to look at it. Raymond and I had built Crane Interiors together from the beginning. Most people didn't know that, because Raymond's name was on everything. His name on the business license, his name on the contracts, his name in the newspaper when the companies won a regional design award 6 years ago. But I had been there from the very first day. We started in 1985 with almost nothing. Raymond had a talent for interior design, a rented office space, and absolutely no idea how to run a business. I had a full-time job as an office manager for an accounting firm and apparently, the patience of a woman who believed in her husband more than she believed in common sense. I handled our finances, balanced the company books every Sunday afternoon, wrote the first client proposals, answered phones during my lunch breaks, and drove across 3 counties to meet with contractors on weekends because Raymond was juggling installations. When the bank turned us down for our first real loan, I went back without him. I sat across from the loan officer at First Midland Bank in Columbus and explained our situation with more clarity and confidence than I actually felt. I put my own credit on the line. My name, my financial history, my future. The officer looked at our paperwork for a long time, and then told me that my involvement made the difference. Raymond came home that evening to a loan approval sitting on the kitchen counter. He picked me up off my feet. I still remember that. I still remember believing, completely and without reservation, that we were in this life together. That was a long time ago. People ask when things began to change, and I always find the question difficult to answer honestly. The truth is that success arrived slowly, and Raymond changed slowly alongside it, and because both things happened gradually, I kept adjusting my expectations instead of recognizing what was actually happening. The first sign was how he started talking about the company. He stopped saying "we built" and started saying "I built." Such a small word, 1 letter. I noticed it the first few times and told myself I was being oversensitive. When clients visited our home and Raymond told the story of starting the company, I would wait for him to mention my contribution. He never did. I sat beside him and smiled and said nothing. The second sign was social. Raymond joined a professional organization and began attending events I was never invited to. At first, he claimed they were tedious industry gatherings and I wouldn't enjoy them. Then he stopped explaining it all. Then came the comments. Quiet ones, wrapped in concern. You might want to update your wardrobe before the holiday party, Edith. Maybe don't share that opinion tonight. The Hendersons are clients. You looked uncomfortable at dinner. Maybe it's better if you stay home next time. Each comment arrived alone, separated by enough days that I could convince myself it was isolated, considerate, reasonable. Together, looking back now, they formed a pattern I should have recognized years earlier. Then a name started appearing in Raymond's conversations the way Claire's name had never quite appeared before. The name was Sylvie Laurent. Raymond mentioned her initially as a new hire, an assistant with strong client management skills. Within 6 months, I heard her name several times a week. Sylvie had reorganized the project schedule. Sylvie had landed a new account. Sylvie had a remarkable eye for detail. One evening, I walked into Raymond's home office without knocking. He had his phone to his ear, and he turned toward me with an expression I had seen on his face in 41 years of marriage. He covered the phone with his hand and said he was in the middle of something. I backed out of the room and stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went downstairs and sat in the kitchen in the dark. The post-nuptial agreement arrived 4 months after that evening. I called my friend Harriet Novak the morning after Raymond left the document on the counter. Harriet had known me for 30 years. She listened to everything without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Edith, you need an attorney." "Not tomorrow." "Today?" I called an attorney that afternoon. Her name was Constance Aldridge, and she was recommended by Harriet's daughter. Constance was direct, calm, and thorough. When I described the postnuptial agreement, she asked me to bring it in immediately. When I brought it in, she read it twice, then looked up at me over her reading glasses. "Don't sign this," she said. I told her I had no intention of signing it. "Good," she set it down. "Now tell me everything about how this business was built." I talked for 2 hours. By the time I finished, Constance had covered 4 pages of a legal pad. She asked me if I had kept any records. Business correspondence, financial documents, anything that would support what I had described. I told her I had kept everything. That was the truth. I had kept 41 years of paperwork in a storage room off our garage, not because I anticipated needing it, because I was organized, because I had always been the person who filed things properly while Raymond left papers in stacks on his desk. Over the following 2 weeks, I worked through those files. It was an emotional process I was not fully prepared for. The early loan documents were there, signed by both of us, but with my name on the guarantee line in larger print than I had remembered. Correspondence with our first 3 clients showed my name in the signatures. Payroll records from the first 5 years were in my handwriting. A business plan from 1987, typed on actual paper because we didn't own a computer yet, had my initials on every page. Near the bottom of one box, I found a birthday card Raymond had given me in 1991. I almost set it aside without opening it. Then I opened it. Inside, in his handwriting, was a note that took my breath away. "Edith, I know I don't say it enough, but this company breathes because you do. Everything good we have because of you. I love you." I sat on the storage room floor for a long time holding that card. Then I put it in a separate folder because Constance was going to want to see it. The divorce papers arrived not long after I met with Constance. Raymond had clearly already been planning this because his attorney moved quickly. The attorney was a man named Stuart Vaughn, polished and efficient and expensive, the kind of attorney whose confidence comes partly from experience and partly from charging enough per hour that clients assume he must be worth it. Stuart Vaughn's initial filing described Raymond as the sole architect of Crane Interiors. It described my contributions as supportive in nature and primarily domestic. It requested that I receive a limited settlement based on those characterizations. I read that filing in Constance's office. When I finished, I was very still for a moment. Then I told Constance I was ready to fight. Our son Warren was not as supportive as I had hoped. Warren was 38 years old, married to a woman named Jillian, and had worked for Crane Interiors for the past 7 years as a project manager. He had his father's confidence, and, I was beginning to learn, his father's willingness to rewrite history when it suited him. He called me 2 days after Raymond served the divorce papers. I was hopeful. Warren was my son. He had watched me work his entire childhood. He knew the truth. "Mom," he said carefully, "I just want to make sure you're thinking clearly about this." I told him I was thinking very clearly. Because fighting Dad in court is going to hurt the company. It could hurt a lot of people's livelihoods. I was quiet for a moment. "Warren, you know what I contributed to that company." A pause. "I know you helped." There was that word again. Helped. Like I had occasionally offered suggestions over coffee. Like I hadn't guaranteed the loan that built the foundation of everything Raymond now wanted to claim as his alone. "I didn't just help," I said. Warren exhaled. "Mom, Dad built that business. He was the designer. He was the face of the company. And who handled the finances for the first 15 years? Silence. Who wrote the business plan? Who stayed on the phone with contractors every weekend so your father could focus on the design work?" More silence. "Warren, you know who?" He said something about hoping I would consider mediation, and then the conversation ended. I sat afterward thinking about the little boy who used to sit beside me at the kitchen table while I worked on company records. He had watched me do it. He had seen it with his own eyes. And he was choosing not to remember. His wife Jillian called the following week. The conversation was shorter and considerably less gentle. Jillian worked in marketing and had a talent for making dismissal sound reasonable. "Edith," she said, "I think you need to be realistic about how courts view marriages of your generation. Women supported their husbands. That was the role. That doesn't translate into ownership." I told Jillian that whether or not it translated into ownership was precisely what the court would determine. I thanked her for calling and ended the conversation. I thanked her for words. I did not sleep well that night, or many nights after that. The isolation of the situation was something I hadn't fully anticipated. Raymond had business connections, professional allies, a well-funded legal team, and apparently our son. I had Constance, Harriet Novak, and boxes of old paperwork. And then something unexpected happened. Sylvie Laurent called me. I had been expecting many things during those months. I had not been expecting that. When I saw an unfamiliar number and answered, the voice on the other end was hesitant, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Crane?" A pause. "This is Sylvie Laurent." I held very still. "I know this is probably the last call you expected." I told her she was right about that. "I'd like to meet with you," she said. "In person, if you're willing. There are things you should know." My first reaction was suspicion. My second was the same. But something in her voice was difficult to dismiss. She didn't sound like a woman calling to gloat or manipulate. She sounded tired. "We met at a coffee shop in Dublin, a suburb of Columbus I had always liked." Sylvie Laurent was younger than I had imagined, perhaps early 30s, with dark circles under her eyes that told me she hadn't been sleeping well either. When she saw me, she stood immediately, and her expression wasn't triumphant. It was relieved, as though she had been waiting for permission to finally say something. I sat down across from her and asked, without any warm-up, "Are you involved with my husband?" She shook her head before I finished the sentence. "No, you're certain, absolutely certain." She folded her hands on the table. "But I know why you think I might be, and I know Raymond never corrected that impression. And that's part of what I need to tell you." The next hour changed everything I thought I understood. According to Sylvie, Raymond had been allowing, and in some cases actively encouraging, the assumption that she and he were personally involved. Not because they were, but because the assumption kept people looking at her instead of somewhere else. "Somewhere else," I repeated. "Meaning what?" She reached into her bag and removed a folder. "Meaning this." Inside were printed financial records, internal company emails, and what appeared to be wire transfer documentation. I studied them carefully. Some of the account names were unfamiliar. Some of the amounts were substantial. All of it made my stomach tighten. All of it made my stomach tighten. "I processed some of them," Sylvie said quietly. "Not all at once. Raymond divided up the financial work between several people. No single person had the complete picture." She paused. "Except eventually I did. By accident." She explained that a software migration 18 months earlier had routed documents incorrectly, landing a complete financial export in her inbox instead of the accounting department. When she reviewed it, she noticed inconsistencies. Payments to vendor accounts that didn't match any known vendors. Transfers that appeared shortly before Raymond began discussing restructuring with his attorney. "How long have you been holding on to this?" I asked. She looked down at the table. Too long. Too long. Why? Because he made me feel like I couldn't. The rumors about us, he never shut them down. Which meant if I said anything against him, everyone would assume I was a woman scorned. She looked up. Who would believe me? I understood that calculation completely. The trap was elegant in its cruelty. What changed? I asked. Sylvie was quiet for a moment. I was in the office the day he told Stuart Vaughn on the phone that there was no judge in Ohio who would side with a homemaker over a man who built something real. Her voice was steady but tight. I had just finished processing 3 years of payroll records that your name appeared on, and he said that. The air in the coffee shop felt very still. I reached across the table and said, "What do you have?" What she had was more than I expected. Emails, financial records, and 3 audio recordings made on her office phone during what she described as moments when Raymond forgot she was in the room. She played me one of them there at the table, quietly, with the phone between us. Raymond's voice was unmistakable. He was talking to someone I couldn't identify. He was relaxed, confident, certain. He said my name twice. He said I had never understood the business side of things. He said, "And I remember every word. She typed a few checks. That's not a business partner. That's a secretary who happened to sleep in the same bed." I looked out the coffee shop window for a while. Then I asked Sylvie if she was willing to testify. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said yes. The weeks between that meeting and the court date were some of the most stressful of my life. Raymond seemed increasingly confident. His legal filings grew more aggressive. Stuart Vaughn's team submitted depositions from 3 company employees who described Raymond as the sole driving force behind Crane Interiors. I sat across from Constance, reviewing each one and feeling the weight of what we were up against. Then Sylvie disappeared. Not dramatically. She simply stopped answering messages. For 4 days, I heard nothing from her. Constance heard nothing. I told myself there were reasonable explanations. I did not entirely believe myself. On the 5th day, a padded envelope arrived in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note that said only, "In case I can't be there. S." I called Constance immediately. She came over that evening, and we went through the contents together. The flash drive contained duplicates of everything Sylvie had already shown me, plus additional documentation I hadn't seen. Account records going back 6 years. A second layer of transfers, smaller amounts, more frequent, the kind that take longer to notice. Constance looked at me carefully when we finished. This was put together by someone who knew exactly what investigators would need to see. "I know," I said. That night I didn't sleep at all. Not because I was frightened, though I was, but because I kept thinking about a woman sitting alone somewhere, afraid, deciding to be brave anyway. And I kept thinking about everything that bravery had cost her before she ever reached out to me. The morning of the hearing was gray and cold. February in Columbus. The courthouse stood at the end of a long block I had driven past hundreds of times over the years, without imagining I would ever walk into it for this reason. Constance was beside me, organized and steady. I was neither of those things, but I was present. That felt like enough. I saw Raymond near the courtroom entrance. He was with Stuart Vaughn. The suit he wore was one I didn't recognize, expensive, recently purchased, the costume of a man performing confidence. When our eyes met briefly, he didn't look angry. He looked indifferent, as though I were a problem he had already calculated his way around. The hearing began and Raymond's narrative rolled out cleanly. Stuart Vaughn was polished. The language was precise. I listened to 41 years of my life described as incidental, and I kept my hands flat on the table in front of me and said nothing. Constance's response was quieter and more deliberate. She introduced documents one at a time, the original loan paperwork, my signature on the guarantee, business correspondence from 1986, 1987, 1989, the 1991 birthday card, Raymond's own handwriting, read aloud into the official record. "Everything good we have because of you." I watched Raymond's jaw tighten when those words were read. Then Constance called Sylvie Laurent. The courtroom doors had been closed. For a long moment nothing happened. I felt my stomach drop. Then the doors opened and Sylvie walked in. She looked exhausted. She looked frightened. But she walked to the witness stand without stopping. Her testimony was careful and specific. She described her role at the company, She described her role at the company. She described the documents she had preserved. She described the documents she had preserved. She described, without embellishment, say about me when he believed no one was listening. When the recording was played, the courtroom was very quiet. Raymond stared at the table. Stuart Vaughn objected several times. Each objection was ruled on. The testimony continued. Then Constance asked the question everyone in the room seemed to be waiting for. Miss Laurent, many people assumed you had a personal relationship with Mr. Crane. Is that accurate? Sylvie looked directly at the judge. It is not. Was there ever any romantic involvement between you? Never. To your knowledge, did Mr. Crane correct that misunderstanding? A pause. No. Why do you believe he allowed it to persist? Sylvie folded her hands in her lap. Because it was useful to him. The murmur in the courtroom was brief but audible. Constance let that settle. Then she continued. Miss Laurent, is there a woman who did have a personal relationship with Mr. Crane? The room went very still. I had not been expecting this question, though perhaps I should have been. Sylvie looked toward me before answering. It was a brief look. Then she answered clearly. Yes, her name is Wanda Beaumont. I had never heard that name in my life, but Warren had. I could tell from across the room. He went very still. Beside him, Jillian pressed her lips together and looked at her lap. Constance moved to the next question. Wanda Beaumont's name appeared in several of the financial records Sylvie had preserved. A luxury apartment in downtown Columbus, vehicle payments, significant monthly deposits, each structured carefully to remain below certain reporting thresholds. The money had flowed from accounts connected to Crane Interior's operating funds over a period of more than 3 years. The documentation was methodical, patient, the kind of paper trail left by someone who plans carefully and assumes no one is watching. Stuart Vaughn objected repeatedly. Judge Patricia Monroe reviewed each objection and allowed the testimony to continue. I watched Raymond. He did not look at me. He looked at a point somewhere above the judge's head, the expression of a man recalculating privately and rapidly. When Constance asked whether Warren had any prior knowledge of Wanda Beaumont, the room shifted. Warren looked like he had aged 10 years in a moment. He didn't speak immediately. But his silence was its own kind of answer, and Judge Monroe was watching him as carefully as I was. Jillian reached over and put her hand on his arm. Whether it was support or a warning, I couldn't tell from where I sat. He finally said, quietly, that he was aware there had been someone. I looked at my son. He could not look at me. I had survived Raymond's betrayal. I had survived the post-nuptial agreement and the legal filings that erased my existence. I had survived months of isolation and sleeplessness, and the particular humiliation of watching someone casually dismantle 41 years of your life in official documents. Warren not being able to look at me was different. That one lived somewhere deeper. The hearing recessed for the day. Constance and I sat in a small conference room. She organized her papers. I stared at the window. Are you all right? She asked. No, I said. She nodded. That's reasonable. Outside the conference room, the hallway was quieter than it had been that morning. I could hear the courthouse winding down for the evening. When we finally left, I saw Warren near the elevator. He started walking toward me. Stopped. Started again. Jillian said something to him in a low voice. He turned away. I walked to my car alone. Drove home. Made tea I didn't drink. Sat in the kitchen until it was dark. In the same kitchen where Raymond had set that post-nuptial agreement on the counter as though it were nothing. Constance called around 9 o'clock to go over the following day. I listened and took notes and thanked her. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. Then I thought about Sylvie, somewhere with her phone off, afraid of what Raymond might do now that she had said everything out loud. And I thought about the woman I had been 30 years ago, signing my name to a loan guarantee for a man I believed in completely. I fell asleep at the kitchen table. The ruling came 3 weeks later. Judge Monroe was deliberate and thorough. She summarized the evidence without editorializing. She noted the loan documentation. She noted the financial records, both those submitted through Constance's office and those preserved by Sylvie Laurent. She noted the discrepancy between Raymond's deposition, which claimed sole credit for the company's formation, and the birthday card in his own handwriting from 1991, which rather clearly said otherwise. She ruled that the marital assets would be divided to reflect genuine mutual contribution. She named specific accounts, specific properties, specific holdings. She noted that the undisclosed transfers raised questions that would require separate investigation by the appropriate authorities. Raymond sat motionless when she finished. Stuart Vaughn leaned over and said something close to his ear. Raymond didn't respond. Constance squeezed my arm. I sat and breathed. Afterward, in the hallway, Sylvie found me before I found her. She looked as tired as she had every time I'd seen her, but something about her was different, less compressed, like she had been holding her breath for 18 months and had finally exhaled. I hugged her. She held on for a moment. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "I should have called you sooner," she said. "You called when you were ready," I said. "That's what matters." Raymond appeared at the end of the hallway. For a moment, all three of us existed in the same space. He looked at me. I waited for something. Anger, an explanation, some version of the man I had known for 4 decades. He walked past without speaking. That was the last full conversation we didn't have. Warren called 2 weeks after the ruling. The call was brief and difficult and more honest than anything we had said to each other in months. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry. I waited. I knew about her. Not at first. But I found out, and I didn't say anything, because I was afraid of what it would do to the company." He stopped. "And to me. I was afraid of what it would do to me." I sat with that for a moment. "You knew, Warren. You watched me fight for 41 years in that business, and you knew, and you said I'd just helped." His voice was low. "I know! That's what you'll have to live with," he said he understood. We talked for another hour. It wasn't resolution, not yet. It was the beginning of something more complicated, which is what real repair always looks like when you're willing to start. Jillian did not call. I did not expect her to. 7 months after the divorce was finalized, I sold the house. People thought I was holding on to it, but the truth was the opposite. I was holding on to other people's ideas about what I should hold on to. The house was full of other people's memories. I wanted mine. I bought a smaller place near Worthington, a town I had always liked, with a good kitchen and a guest room for Harriet Novak when she visited. I painted the front door a color Raymond would have considered impractical. It is a very good color. I also started something I hadn't planned on. Constance and I began meeting informally with women in similar situations. Older women. Women who had been the invisible infrastructure of someone else's dream. Women who arrived at attorneys' offices without knowing they had any rights or any proof or any path forward. We didn't have a name for it at first. Then, one afternoon, Sylvie, who had joined us, suggested calling it something simple. "What about kept records?" she said. "Because that's what mattered in the end. The things people saved when they weren't sure why. We kept the name." We meet twice a month now in a room at the Worthington Library. Some women come once, some keep coming. All of them arrive carrying something they've been holding alone for too long, and all of them leave a little lighter, not because anyone has the answers, but because being heard by people who understand is not nothing. It is, in fact, almost everything. I thought about Raymond the other day. Not often, but sometimes. I thought about the man who had picked me up off my feet in a kitchen in 1985 because a loan had been approved. I thought about the letter he wrote me. "Everything good we have because of you." He was right then. He just forgot it later. But I didn't forget. And it turned out that what I had remembered and kept and refused to let someone else erase was worth something after all. If you are watching this and someone has spent years telling you that your contribution didn't count, that you only helped, that the life you built together was really their work and your presence was incidental, I want you to know something. The records don't lie. The paperwork doesn't forget. And the truth has a way of surviving people who would rather it didn't. You know what you did. And somewhere in a storage room, or a filing cabinet, or the back of a desk drawer, there is probably proof. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't matter. It matters enormously. You always did.